Hello, I'm Nathan Laube, and welcome back for this third installment of this week-long concert coming to you from St. Matthew the Apostle Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Yesterday we traveled to Paris to hear the splendid French sonorities under the fingers of César Franck in his Fantaisie in A. And today we're actually going to continue in the same church where Franck, for most of his life, was organist at Sainte-Clotilde, a magnificent basilica in the neo-Gothic style built in the mid-century, which housed one of Cavaillé-Coll's most famous organ creations. And it was Franck's student and eventual successor at Sainte-Clotilde, Charles Tournemire, from whom the next composition we'll enjoy today flows. This is his Epiphania Fantaisie from a monumental cycle of 51 suites that Tournemire wrote in the late 1920s and early 30s called L'Orgue Mystique, or the Mystical Organ. And this seminal work of 20th century music is one which is completely devoted to Gregorian chant. And you can say it's the sort of flowering of all of this momentum towards the restoration of church music in the late 19th century and early 20th century, moving away from these big orchestral masses, moving away from the aforementioned tradition that came up, for example, in the music by Liszt and by Franck, where composers and improvisers often brought the style of the opera comique into the church. People like Tournemire would have none of that, and they really saw the language of Gregorian chant as being the ultimate in generating material for beautiful church music that would magnificently adorn the Catholic liturgy. And this also has to do with the revival of plain chant, for example, in the Solemn Abbey, and also a very important moment for giving this whole revival a lot of legs was the Motu Proprio of 1903, signed by Pope Pius X, which gradually encouraged the use of more and more plainsong in the liturgy. So finally, in the late 1920s, we could see this in full bloom. And the piece that I'm going to play for you today, this wonderful postlude, this sortie, or this, as Tournemire often calls it, pièce terminale, gives us a wonderful impression of the way that Tournemire would adorn his liturgy with these magnificent plainsong confections. This particular piece begins high up in the treble part of the keyboard, like some sort of celestial alleluia coming down to earth. And it's using also one of the most classical sounds of the pipe organ, the so-called plangeux, or the sound we most associate with the sound of the pipe organ, a sonority that no other instrument imitates. And gradually, as that music falls down with open fifths, almost an archaic medieval sonority, then we hear a dark, velvety sound of the organ's foundations, maybe a description of the heavens and the earth. And later, these different little fragments of plain chant will chatter and interact with each other in really magnificent ways until finally, after various waves of crescendo, you'll hear the tutti erupt in the organ, the full resources of the organ, underpinned by these austere, open fifths in the pedal, with again a sort of archaic medieval sound. Marvelous effect, very powerful effect indeed, very stirring one. So you can imagine the way in which congregations in this interwar period could have reacted to this deeply felt spiritual music that must have certainly spoken to that time. So I look forward very much to sharing with you this one of the most celebrated compositions of Charles Tournemire, which probably reflects a little bit the way in which he improvised every Sunday morning. And with that, I'll leave you with just a little quote from a student of Tournemire's, who became, of course, a very famous organ composer in his own right, Maurice Duroufflet, who described a liturgy at Sainte-Clotilde, where Tournemire was organist, the following way. Tournemire never played from written music on Sunday Mass. With the book of Gregorian chant always on the music rack, open to the liturgical office of the day, he improvised throughout the entire Mass, with an interruption only for the reading of the Gospel and the sermon. That amounted to a half hour of music. I hasten to add that this half hour of music was always inspired by the Gregorian themes of the day and reflected the different portions of the service. It was not a concert, but a genuine musical commentary on the liturgy. So I hope you enjoy this magnificent Epiphania Fantaisie of Charles Tournemire from his monumental L'Orgue Mystique. See you tomorrow.